Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Town Matters podcast, a brief update about what's going on in Brattleboro town government. I'm your host, Town Manager John Potter, broadcasting from the BCTV studios in Brattleboro, Vermont. Today, I will give you an update on what happened at the Select Board's most recent regular meeting on Tuesday, May 19, as well as what's on the agenda for their next meeting on Tuesday, June 2nd. Finally, I'll mention a few announcements before wrapping it up. The last meeting was May 19th, and at this meeting, the board had 9 items on the consent agenda. That included approving the renewal of a first and third class liquor license for Sage's Pub, located at 6 Flat Street, renewal of a tobacco license and tobacco substitute endorsement permit for Smoke and Munch at 707 Putney Road, approval of the naming of a new private road off of Quails Hill Road to be known as C2 Way, authorization for the award of a $283,354 contract to GPI Construction for the final phase of interior and exterior work at Brooks Memorial Library. Authorization for an agreement with L&D Safety Marking Corporation for long line striping services on town roads. Authorization and ratification of a settlement in the matter of Lepisto versus Brattleboro based on advice of counsel and VLCT, providing that town funds used for the settlement shall not exceed the deductible amount. Authorization of a $1,578,000 award of the Pleasant Valley Redundant Water Storage Tank Project to Statewide Aquastore Inc. of East Syracuse, New York, and filing of an amendment to an existing drinking water state revolving fund loan agreement for additional project funding for that project. And 2 other items on consent: approval of a parade permit for the AIDS Project of Southern Vermont's annual AIDS Walk, which will be held on Sunday, May 23rd from 10 to noon on Main Street sidewalks. And finally, announcement of a vacancy on the Brattleboro Housing Partnership's Board of Commissioners for a 5-year term. And any interested applicants can apply on the town website or at the town manager's office. And those 9 items, which were on consent on May 19th, were approved by a vote of 5-0. Next, on May 19th, the board took up 2 items of unfinished business that carried over from their May 5th meeting. The first was a records retention policy, and the town attorney came looking for feedback and input on the idea of a records retention policy. She discussed the item and talked about some of the options that the board has. Following that, there was discussion on data storage, messaging platforms. There was talk about transitory records. A board member asked about personal records like their own notes, and the town attorney clarified that those are definitely public records. And in the end, there was a motion to adopt 3 schedules for record retention as presented, and that passed by a vote of 5-0. The other item of unfinished business was a review of the Select Board 2026-2027 Rules of Procedure, which were adopted back in March. And the board chair offered that board members wanted to discuss 3 possible changes: removing the time limit on the meeting length, changes regarding how things are removed from the consent agenda, and a possible ban on select board members using their cell phones. So the first motion that came out of this discussion was a motion to remove the rule about extending a meeting beyond 9:45 p.m. only by unanimous consent. An amendment was made to that to say that the select board may extend the meeting beyond 9:45 by a majority vote. That amendment failed on a vote of 1-4. So going back to the original motion that would eliminate the 9:45 limit on meetings passed by a vote of 4-1. Then the board chair discussed the idea of pulling items from the consent agenda and suggested that perhaps they require 3 votes to remove an item because removal can have a large impact on the meeting. But in the end, there was no motion on this suggestion and no change made. The final rule of procedure they wanted to talk about was prohibiting cell phone use by the board at the table. And there was a motion to prohibit cell phone use at the table by select board members. And there was an amendment to add except for emergency situations. And that motion with the amendment passed by a vote of 4-0 to 1 abstention. Then the board took up regular business, and first on their agenda for May 19th was an application from the India Masala House for an outside consumption permit. And Recreation and Parks Director Carol Lalott discussed a request that she had had from this restaurant to serve meals and alcohol in Pliny Park using portable seating and tables and a sort of way to designate the area. The board asked a bunch of questions about this proposal and talked about usage fees and sort of how this would be done. There was a conversation about obscuring the mural on a neighboring property. There was talk about alcohol consumption in public spaces. And in the end, the board considered a motion to postpone this discussion to a time on June 2nd, and that motion passed by a vote of 4-1. The following item, the board took up the local emergency management plan, and Fire Chief Jay Simons and Police Chief Jeremy Evans presented on the local emergency management plan, which is required of the town in order to qualify for funding if we're to have an emergency. And there was a brief discussion, and the board approved the local emergency management plan as presented by a vote of 5-0. The fire chief stuck around for the next item, which was the fire department quarterly report. He was joined by Assistant Chief Charles Keir and EMS Superintendent William Fritz, and they discussed the fire department's performance over the past quarter, and there was some discussion on hiring and EMS revenues. There was no motion, and the board moved on to the fiscal year 26 quarterly budget review for the third quarter, and finance consultant Bonnie Batchelder gave a presentation, discussed items from a memo that she had prepared on that third quarter review. There was some limited discussion and no motion taken on that item. Then DPW Director Dan Tyler and Assistant DPW Director Pete Lynch brought the draft fiscal year 2027 utility fund budget to the board. They talked about wastewater fees and wastewater collection, use of OpenGov and Commonwealth Dairy, and revenue from outside septic haulers. There was a little bit of feedback, maybe, not much, and then no motion was taken, and that will be brought back to a subsequent meeting for consideration on approval. Also, on May 19th, the draft fiscal year 2027 parking fund budget was presented by Police Chief Jeremy Evans, who the police department is now doing all of the parking work for the town, and including putting together the budget. And he discussed income expected from the parking fund or into the parking fund, as well as staffing. It was noted that there was no fee changes proposed in the draft budget. There was some concern expressed around the fact that the number of permits has been slightly down. There was talk about the workers' comp line, billables and receivables. They talked about more signage and, investing in more signage to be put up around town regarding parking, as well as making loading zones clearer. They talked about free parking on Sundays and rebalancing fees across the different parking lots, but there was no motion, and this was just sort of a feedback discussion, and this will be brought back to a future meeting as well. And that was everything that was discussed on the May 19th meeting. The next select board meeting is a regular meeting on Tuesday, June 2nd at 6:15 p.m. in the select board meeting room at 230 Main Street. On the consent agenda, there are a number of items. I'll read down quickly what those are. There is a letter of commendation for an Eagle Scout, seeking approval for that letter. There is designation of a voting delegate for a special meeting that the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is calling of the membership. There is award of a $168,938 bid for Church Street retaining wall replacement, as was contemplated in the capital plan, as well as a $275,000 bid for an Akeley Road box culvert replacement project, and award of an $80,477 contract for crack sealing on town roads. A couple other things on consent include reallocation of some special project funding to allow for some repair work at the transportation center, and that is for an $8,000 reallocation. There is approval of a $53,200 upfit for police vehicle, ratification of an extension of services for SVE Associates for work on the library project, and reappointment of Dan Adams as the tree warden. And the 2026 dog warrant is on consent, as well as updating enforcement authority for the animal control officer. So get your dog licenses, everybody. That is what's on consent. Next, the board has one item of unfinished business, which was postponed from the May 19th meeting, and that is the India Masala House and consideration around the use of Pliny Park. Rec and Parks Director Carol Lalott will not be at the meeting, but I will be talking about a pilot project that she has put together with the owners of the India Masala House to bring that back and see if the select board would consider trying some things out there at Pliny Park. Under regular business, let's see, the board will announce some committee vacancies that will be vacant July 1st. So several committees need to have people re-up on their participation, or if you're interested in joining a committee, those will be announced. Then the police chief will bring the fiscal year 2027 parking budget back, hopefully for approval. And the staff looked into several issues that were raised at the last board meeting, and those will be discussed. Then staff will bring a request as to whether the select board would like the town to make donation requests of nonprofits again this year. And that will be followed by our first collective bargaining agreement, which will be brought for approval. And that is the one with the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 98, which is predominantly librarians and administrative staff. And that will be a new 3-year contract through July 1st, 2029. And the final two items of regular business on June 2nd will be an update from the Windham Regional Career Center from Windham Regional Career Center staff, and a study session by the Select Board on their potential 2027 legislative priorities. So that is June 2nd. I have a few announcements. We're very excited to announce that a ribbon cutting ceremony for Brattleboro's new Amtrak station will be happening this June. Please put it on your calendar and join us at the train station located at 10 Vernon Street on June 24th from 11:30 to 1 p.m. for the celebration of the station, along with the unveiling of the Words Trail mural. A train is scheduled to arrive around 1 p.m., so let's get together to welcome it in style. Please note that parking at the Depot Street lot will be limited during the event, so plan to park elsewhere. Both the Transportation Center and the High Grove lot have 10-hour parking, which will give you plenty of time to enjoy downtown after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Vermont Association for Mental Health and Addiction Recovery and the Town of Brattleboro will be hosting an interactive community conversation about opioid use disorder. The conversation, which will include video interviews of people with lived experience, will center on topics like how we support people with substance use disorder and how we can work together to reduce stigma in our community. This event is happening in the Select Board room at the Municipal Center on June 9th from 9 to noon. And finally, if you're looking to meet new people this summer, the Rec and Parks Department will be hosting kickball games for adults on Sunday evenings. The program will run from Sunday, June 14th through August 23rd. Games will be held from 5 to 7 p.m. This kickball program is for anyone 18 years old and older, and games will be played at Living Memorial Park on the lower softball field. You're welcome to join at any point. The fee is $3 a night for Brattleboro residents and $5 a night for non-Brattleboro residents. You can register ahead of time if you want at brattleboro.gov/recreation. Okay, so there's your update. This podcast is put together to communicate in a different format about what's going on in town government. Please reach out to me at the town manager's office or email me at townmanager@brattleboro.gov if you have any thoughts for what you'd like to hear on this podcast or if you want to discuss any town matter further. As always, there's lots of additional information on the town website, brattleboro.gov, about what's discussed at the select board meetings, so please check in there for agendas, reports, and backup materials. Thanks for listening, and tune in again soon.